Hi everyone, this is Taylor with the Daily Geddon, and today we're going to talk about the CARES Act, HR 748. I'm sure so many people have heard everything about it, and today we're going to really dive into the details and show you maybe a little bit of what you haven't seen. The CARES Act stands for the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, and as always, we're going to do straight facts, straight from the source. I'm going to preface everything that I say with, this bill is extremely long. It's over 900 pages, and because of that, there are a lot of definitions to generic terms that Congress uses throughout the bill. I'm going to have to define some of those generic terms just so that you get the full message of what I'm trying to say, so you have to bear with me as I read out what those definitions are. With that, the first title of this bill is titled Keeping American Workers Paid and Employed Act. And this title is more about keeping small businesses afloat, keeping those small businesses' payrolls rolling, making sure that their mortgage payments aren't sinking them, and trying to keep small business Americans in business. Here's the first of those many definitions I was talking about. A small business is defined by the Small Business Administration, and the Small Business Administration keeps a list of criteria that designates exactly that, what a small business is. For most businesses, it's having less than 500 employees. So the bill has a general rule, if there is no applicable standard to your business, that if you have less than 500 employees, you are designated a small business in this bill. The first part of Title I of this bill adds a clause to the Small Business Act to allow for small businesses to apply for loans to cover payroll costs. This is called the Paycheck Protection Program. There's a couple things that go into calculating the maximum value of the loan that a small business is allowed to take out against this section. A small business is allowed to take out 2.5 times the payroll cost that they incurred from February 15th of 2020 to June 30th of 2020. Additionally, if they had any loans that they had taken out after January 31st of 2020 in order to pay for payroll costs, those loans are covered as well. The absolute maximum value for one of these loans is $10 million. And another important note is that when calculating payroll costs for a small business, no employee that makes over $100,000 in a year can be calculated into that value. So only employees that make less than $100,000 a year get to be added to the loan value and then multiply that number by 2.5. This is where you're going to see the numbers from the headlines. This is the $350 billion that's being given to small businesses. It covers completely all of these loans that small businesses are going to apply for. Any small business that applies for a qualified loan is going to be completely forgiven of all debt related to this very specific loan. And I want you to notice that I said very specific loan because there are certain details in here that we'll go over that might shed some light on what exactly this loan is. The bill continues to say that any amount of money from this loan used to pay for payroll costs, mortgage and rent costs, or utility costs will be covered and completely forgiven. That means you don't have to pay any principal or interest on the loan. Now it's important to remember that the maximum amount for the loan amount was calculated by 2.5 times payroll costs for those 5 months. So it does not include the mortgage, rent, and utilities, but you can pay it from this amount. Under Section 1112, different types of loans are going to be incorporated into coverage by the federal government. These are loans that are probably for mortgages, rents, and leases. These are loans that are made under the Small Business Act under Section 7A. And it's going to cover the principal, interest, and any fees associated with these loans. The amount that's going to be covered for each of these loans is 6 months worth of principal, interest, and fees of that loan. This bill also provides grants to things like small business development centers to allow for education on how small businesses can go about applying for the loans that we've talked about, as well as other ways that small businesses can get assistance from the government. It doesn't stop there. These grants are also going to be used to educate small businesses on how COVID-19 can affect supply chain and distribution, on how these small businesses can move to some type of telework, and how telecustomer service is going to be a thing in the future. Another topic that Title I of the CARES Act deals with is bankruptcy. And I don't pretend to be any kind of tax expert, so I went to a bunch of different sites to understand exactly what a lot of this means. Chapter 7 versus Chapter 11 bankruptcies. And essentially what it could come down to, and after reading the bill myself and verifying what I had thought, is that this part of the bill makes it so that reorganization or a Chapter 11 bankruptcy is much more streamlined and cheaper and easier to do. That means that small businesses that are going to declare bankruptcy can make a plan with the bank to pay back on a certain payment plan that might be more lenient than what they had in the past. Not only that, but it increases the threshold of this Chapter 11 bankruptcy from $2.7 million to $7 million for a year, so that small businesses can take advantage of this plan in order to reorganize their debt structure. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the direct appropriations made in Title I of the bill. I'm going to go over them in length just so you know exactly where all the money is going. I think it's important to understand how they appropriate certain amounts of money to certain parts of the bill in order to cover it, because it gives you a little bit of idea of what Congress thinks is the most important part of this bill or the most important part of this legislation. So first of all, there's the $350 billion that's going to the small business loans that we had talked about to cover payroll costs. That's the 2.5 times payroll costs for those 5 months. There's $675 million going to administration fees to the Small Business Administration. That's to cover salaries for people who are going to enact this bill. It's a lot of money. There's $25 million going to the for more administration costs to the Office of the Inspector General. And we have another $265 million going to administration costs. So we've got over $1 billion, or right about $1 billion of costs in administration costs just related to this bill. There's $10 million going to the Department of Commerce for minority business development. We have a $10 billion amount going to the EIDL grants, and those are the grants that I talked about that are going to educate small businesses. There's $17 billion being appropriated to other types of small business loans. So these are the loans that were not covered. This is the 6-month period that they're going to cover. So this is the loans that are not covered by the payroll loans, but they're loans that were made previously or during this time or maybe a little bit in the future to cover anything that a small business needs. And this, from the $17 billion, is going to pay 6 months of that loan. The last bit of appropriations is $25 million to the Department of Treasury, and that's for salaries and expenses as well. So you get close to, it's probably over $1 billion in administration fees and salaries in order to enact this bill. And with that, it's going to bring us to this week's pivot. The most important part of Title I of the bill is how well it works with itself. Yes, the loans for small businesses is very important, and having the cash on hand to cover payroll and to cover mortgages and to cover rent is very, very good. But for those small businesses that were already on the brink, which are truly the target of this bill, and to keep them moving forward and to give them a chance, allowing them to file for a Chapter 11 bankruptcy versus a Chapter 7 bankruptcy along with these loans is really the kicker. Being able to file to restructure your debt and come up with a different pay scale and how you're going to pay off your debt rather than having to liquidate all of your assets is one of the largest things that this bill has to offer. And a lot of news outlets probably aren't talking about bankruptcy because it's not as big and sexy as $350 billion are going to be given out to small businesses. But truthfully, the conjunction of the two is what makes this bill so powerful. I think that Congress was really aiming to bail out those businesses that were right on the brink already and just got pushed over the edge by COVID-19. I think they did a really good job with that. They allow for businesses to apply for these loans to cover payroll and other expenses and just general operating costs. But like I said earlier in the video, the biggest thing is the conjunction of filing for a different type of bankruptcy so they don't have to liquidate all their assets and getting the loans. I think those two things together really allow for those businesses that were really close to going out of business already to come back and maybe stick around a little longer. There really is no end in sight for this thing. I'm sure this is not the last thing we'll see for legislation on COVID-19. Stay tuned for the rest of the bill. I'm going to get through it as fast as I can. Really lengthy, so thanks for holding on with me. As always, remember to follow me on Twitter and maybe drop a comment in the comment section. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, and thanks for watching.